Okay, cool. Welcome back to our second part of client-server communication session. And previously, we talked about how the app knows which server I should send the request to, which means what's the IP address, right, of the server. And second, we talked about the HTTP protocol, which is a language the app and the web server is going to use, right? The last one is we talked about the REST API, which means how the app sends request to the server and how the server sends request back, send response back to the app. Okay, so now let's talk about more about how the app sends request to server. Okay, so let me copy this over. Okay, so this is the app and this is the web server, and the client can send request to this web server. Okay, so the app sends request to the web server. Usually it's very simple, right? You just use the REST API. You send a request to the web server fetches the data or do some computation. So let's see, here we have server, a database, right? So the server, when the server receives the request, it fetch data from database, or it doesn't fetch data, it just do some simple computation, or it call other servers to get some resource, right? And then it sends the response back, right? So here the server sends the response back to the client, okay? So here, let me make it more obvious. Okay, so the server sends back the request, the client sends the request to the server. Okay, and so this is request and this is response from the server, right? So it's very simple. It's a very simple process. So for most cases, for example, when user clicks some button, yes, you send the request, right? Or when the user just opens the app, he needs to see the most recent post from his friends, or in TikTok, he wants to see the most recently recommended or the most recent popular videos, right? In this case, it's also because user does some action, right? So in most cases, the user does some action, and then because of these actions, the app or the client will send a request to the server, right? And then server sends back response. This is a very common case, right? But also if you think more about it, there are also some other cases where you need to request data from or fetch data from the server. Even users doesn't take any actions, right? Can you think some use cases about this? So the first thing I could think of is notifications, right? So now you have some, for example, someone followed you, or someone sent you a message, or send you a friend invitation or something. So in this case, it's not because a user did something, right? It's because the user needs to receive some latest information, right? Which is notifications. So in this case, how does the request goes on? So how you send, because the user didn't take any action, right? How the app can send a request to the server, right? Okay, so one way I could think of is you just, so in the app, in the client, so in your app you have a timer or something. So which means, let's say every 10 seconds or every 1 minute, the app send a request to the server to ask, oh, whether I have notifications, whether I have latest news to show up in my app now or not. So you send a request. You still use the previous architecture we talked about, which is, yeah, just send a request to the server, right? But instead of send a request, when user take some action, you send a request periodically every 10 seconds or every 30 seconds or every 1 minute, right? So this is how it works. Yes, does it work? Yes, of course it works, right? However, this is very expensive and very complex because let's say you don't have notifications, right? So maybe in the whole day you don't have any new notifications, right? But still, even you don't have notifications, the app still needs to send a request to server every 10 seconds or every 1 minute, right? So this is a high cost for the bandwidth, right? And second is that it's just doesn't sound right? So the correct way to do this, or the correct way, in theory, the correct thing to do is server just tells you, okay, there's something happening. Now I will give you some new data, right? Okay, so, but anyway, periodically send the request works, right? So we call this the pull model of a REST API, or pull model of a request, right? Okay, so this is a pull model. So in contrast, there is another model which is called push model, which is it's in the other direction, right? Which is instead of the app pulls data from the server, now it's the server push data to the app whenever there are some events or latest information to give to the app, right? Okay, so how does this push model work? Okay, so let's copy paste this. Okay, so this is an app and this is web server. Okay, so from the very, very high level, we talked, oh, it's actually in the other direction, which is web server send a request, or not send a request, send the data to the app, right? But can this actually work? In most cases, this cannot work because in HTTP protocol or in this REST API architecture, it must be the client who sends the request to the server. It cannot be the server send the request or send data to the app. So in practice, this will not work. So still, it needs to be the client send the request to the web server, right? But the difference between this push model and the pull model is, okay, before we talk about the difference, let's see. So you get this line here. So it's still the app sends a request to the web server, right? So this is push model. Okay, now what will be the difference with this push model and the pull model we talked about? The difference is that, okay, so there are multiple ways to do this push model, right? So first, now let's go into talk about this longpoll, okay? So the first way to do this push model is longpoll, right? So in this case, it's still the app sends a request to the web server, but let's say the web server indeed does not have any data to send back to the app. So for example, there is no new notifications to send back to the app, right? So instead of just respond empty data to the app, so in the pull model, it's okay, web server finds, oh, there's no data I can currently give to you, then it will just send an empty response, right? Which is send a response without any data to the app. Then the app knows, oh, I don't have anything to show, right? So it does nothing. And then 10 seconds later, I send another request, right? But in this long pull model, if there's nothing to show, the web server will just hold the request. What does this mean? It means, oh, I received the request, but I will not respond to the app. I just hold the request unless I get some new data. Okay, so for example, let's say the app sent its first request, to get, oh, can you give me latest notifications for me? Okay, now the web server finds nothing. There's no new notifications to send back. So I just hold the request. I will never respond to you. I just hold it, okay? So, and then the client receives no data. So the client also got hold, okay? Now let's see at some time, let's say maybe 3 or 5 minutes later, now I have new data to provide or new notifications to provide, right? Now new data occurs. Then web server will just respond to this request, okay? Now the server sends back the response to say, oh, now I give you the latest data, right? And after the app receives the latest data and process it, then the app immediately send another request to the web server. And then again, web server hold it until there are new data arrived. And when there are new data arrived, it will send response back to the app, okay? Okay, now let's have a retrospect. What's the difference between this longpoll based push model and the pull model? So the pull model, when server receives the request and there is no new data, it immediately sends back response, right, with empty data. However, in this longpoll based model, it will just hold the request until there are new data arrived, right? So there are one case to consider, which is what if the browser, due to some network conditions or something, the browser disconnects the request. What happened? If the connection is disconnected, it's simple. When the app detects the network is stable again or some problem is gone and now I can reconnect to the web server again, then it immediately sends a request to web server. So that's how it works. Okay, so we talked about the first kind of longpoll, right? But there's also a second kind of push model, which is WebSocket. So this is the second technology to achieve this kind of push model. So how does it work? Okay, so let's still copy paste this. Okay, so here is the app. Okay, and here is my web server. Okay, so in this case, still the app send a request. It's a HTTP request, right? So I will send a request to the web server, and now the web server will upgrade this request to a new protocol, which is called WebSocket. Okay, so WebSocket is a new protocol. It's not when you done the upgrade to WebSocket, it's not HTTP or HTTPS request anymore. So now it's based on TCP protocol. So I will not explain more about what is TCP, what is HTTP. You can just read more documents offline. But now you just need to understand, now it's a new protocol, which is called WebSocket, which is based on TCP. Okay, the unique characteristic about WebSocket is that it's a bi-directional communication. So here, okay, let me draw it. Okay, so here it means that after you set up the WebSocket connection, the client can directly send data to the web server. And the web server can also directly send data to the app in real time, right? In very low latency. So what are use cases for this WebSocket? Remember, WebSocket is bi-directional communication. Okay, let's consider you are chatting with someone. Okay, so maybe it's a group chat or maybe it's a one-on-one chat with your friends, right? So in this case, you do want to receive chats in real time, right? So you will send chat messages to your friends, and your friends will also in real time send messages to you, right? So in this case, it's bi-directional communication, right? So when you send messages to your friends, the messages will be sent from app to the web server. So you send data from app to server. And when your friends send messages to you, or your followers send messages to you, the data will be sent from web server to the app, right? So this is bi-directional. Okay, so and another use case, or maybe an even more common use case, is gaming, right? So you are playing some online games. So for example, Counter-Strikes or some other game. And in this case, definitely you will send data from app to server because you are sending, for example, you are shooting someone, right? That's action data which needs to be sent to the web server. And also when some other one hits you, or when other one shoots you, it's also a data which needs to be sent from the web server back to the app, right? And we need it to be in real time. We need to be in very low latency. So in all these cases, we're using WebSocket. So this is a second way to do push model. And actually in WebSocket, it's both push and pull, right? Okay, cool. And there are also some other ways to do this kind of push model. For example, server-side events or something. But I don't want to talk on them here because yes, if you want to understand them, just read the documents. But I think the most commonly used push model is longpoll and WebSocket. And also we also talked about the previous one, which a previous fake push model, which is you just periodically send the request to the server, right? Okay, so let's wrap up this session. So in this session, whole session about client-server communication, we talked about the DNS request to get the server's IP based on the URL you input. And we also talked about the HTTP and HTTPS protocol, which is a common language app and web server talk with each other, right? We also talk about the most common way to send request and send request back, which is REST API. And there are four different kinds of REST API. One is GET request, one is PUT request to create some new resource, right? POST request is the way to update an existing resource, and delete is just delete a resource, right? We also talked about how the client get resource from the web server, right? So first way is to the pull model, which is the app just send a request and the web server immediately send a response back to the app, right? We also talk about the push model, which is, there are two ways, right? So first is longpoll, which is, web server holds request until there are some new data to send back. The second way of push model is WebSocket, which is app can send data immediately to web server can send data in real time back to client. Okay, thank you for joining me in this client-server communication session. So see you next time. Remember to subscribe to this channel, okay? Bye-bye.